Welcome to this year's class on bringing the Seder alive for all generations. 2024-5784. It's a year which is going to be a different Seder night because Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, are currently at war. And our hearts and minds go out to the Chayalim, the soldiers, and of course the hostages dislocated, detached from their families, and to their families, and to the Jewish people in Medina Israel particularly. This is an existential battle with the forces that want to deny our past and to undermine our future. And it makes it all the more important that we run a really engaging Seder night, because that is about creating a future built on our past. And that's what we are all about as a people. So as we sit down to our Seder night and we have in minds those in captivity, those on the battlefront, let's really make it something special. Now, this, for those who are coming for the first time, we've been doing the Shiur for many, many years. Welcome back to our veteran listeners. And we try to share ideas that are new. So if you like what you hear, you can find on the Seed Archives or on Torah Anytime many ideas from previous years that we won't be repeating this year. Let me also say that there are two levels of Shiur. This is the standard level. If you're looking for more Divrei Torah, more complex ideas, then you'll find a variation on this Shiur, variation on this theme on Torah Anytime. But let's begin with some of the resources that Seed have prepared for this year. And perhaps the most fancy one is this one. This one will be available from the Seed office, 89580820, or info@seed.uk.net. It's a really beautiful resource prepared by colleague Rabbi Adam Edwards. And what it has is on the front, there's a contemporary family. And by pulling out the card, we then place that contemporary family in different situations. All those situations are linked to the Haggadah. Some are about Egypt, but some are about different times in Jewish history. On the back, there are discussion points. Imagine if you could step into a TARDIS, if you could step into a time machine and go back into those occasions. How would you view them? As the mother, as the father, as the children? Therefore, at different points in the Haggadah, you can utilize this, perhaps have a monitor around the table or share it around the table for others to have a go, to then reveal the next particular scene and use that to discuss the paragraph in the Haggadah in front of you. Our goal, as we always say, is to enhance the Seder, not to replace it, but to enhance it. That's one particular resource. Here's another one. And this is available to download from our website. And that is, we have breaking news strips. Breaking news strips. Cut these out before Seder night. Roll them roll them up and pass them round the table beforehand. There are instructions as to how to use this. Number them, pass them around the table beforehand, and they also link to different parts of the Haggadah. And at different moments in the Haggadah, the appointed person can jump up with breaking news. For example, slaves are lazy, declares Pharaoh to Moses and Aaron. They must work harder. That can then generate a discussion. How would you react if you saw that breaking news? Or, prices soar for blood-free water as Egyptians pay to drink. So again, this is a contemporary way of bringing alive the words within the Haggadah itself. And on our website, we have guidelines as to at what points in the Haggadah these could be used. Here is another idea for this year, and that is the Seder begins with 15 stages, with almost the agenda for the evening, 15 stages. So Avigdor Frankenhaus from Manchester, who's got a very, very creative mind and has produced a box of ideas for Shabbat. Also, we commissioned him, well, he volunteered, I should say, to produce some ideas for Seder night as well. Here's a nice, very nice one. Cut out these various cards. They are the sequence of the events on Seder night as listed in the beginning of the Haggadah, and then place them around the room in fairly obvious places. In other words, not hidden, but visible around the room before the Seder night starts. as we approach that particular point in the Haggadah, the children can get up and race to them and then get the card that's relevant, holding that card all the way through that particular stage of the Haggadah. You can vary the theme if you don't want them running around. You can hand them out beforehand and get them to hold out, but it's a lovely way of tracing through the Haggadah. Here's another idea, which is to keep the children following the Haggadah, if that's what you'd like to do. We have on our resources various different phrases that you'll find in the Haggadah. The truth is you can find your own phrases, and I've just given a sample to get you started. You could do this in English, or if you'd like, and your family can work with that, you can do that in the Hebrew. But cut out phrases before, type out and then cut out phrases before the Seder night and give them to people to insert into the Haggadah in the right page. When their phrase comes up, then they can wave, shout, do a handstand, whatever it is, and read out their phrase and say what that phrase means. Nicer way of keeping their attention because they're waiting for their phrase. Or you can do it slightly differently, which is rather than telling them where their phrase is, you give them their phrase and they have to look out for their phrase. Again, one of Mr. Rabbi Victor Frankenhauser's ideas, they can look out for their phrase, and that keeps them on their toes as they look out for their phrase. Depending on the range of children around the table, you could differentiate it and give them more obscure phrases to those children who know more. And one more variation on that theme, which I particularly liked because it's very, very simple, is name slips. I have on our website a list of many, many, many names that appear in the Haggadah. Some obvious names. Pharaoh is an obvious one. Cut them out and hand out the names and ask people to look out for their particular name as we go through the Haggadah. It might surprise you to know that the hardest name to find the whole in the Haggadah is Moses, only mentioned once and mentioned quite, I would say, obliquely. So these are some ideas to use and to prepare before Seder night and to use to keep your Seder night alive, dynamic and moving. And like anything else, Seder night a good Seder requires a bit of preparation. The meal doesn't happen by itself, nor does a good Seder happen by itself. So look at these resources. We've made it as user-friendly and as accessible as possible, all on our website. One more to come later on in the Seder, so hang on in there. Let's begin with some ideas now, because we want to give the Seder night substance. We want to give it some really good ideas. At the beginning of the Seder night, very early on, we actually take the middle matzah and we break it in two. This is called yachatz. I just got up to get the family Haggadah, so I'm giving you the page reference. Page 24, Yachatz. You take the middle matzah and you break it in two and you hide the larger part away. That's going to be hidden away for the afikomen. Now, the question is, what is this all about? Many different levels of understanding this. At its most basic level, we're acting like the poor man who only had matzah to eat, as they only had matzah to eat in Egypt, because they ate matzah in Egypt, as we're about to say soon. And if they got some, they would hide some away for tomorrow, because who knows what tomorrow would bring. There are deeper levels to this as well, and I want to share one with you that I saw in the Haggadah by the Novominsk Rebbe. And he says as follows: in fact, the Torah indicates, when it talks about this night that was preserved for the coming out of Egypt, he uses the word preserved, shimurim, twice. Shimurim means preserved, guarded, or anticipated, because this night was preserved for two redemptions. The original redemption when we came out of Egypt was on this night. But in fact, we are told that future redemption will also be at this time of year. Because we've experienced one redemption, the redemption of the past, when we came out of Egypt, but the greater redemption is still to come. That's the redemption of the future, when Mashiach will come, when the Jewish people will have peace in the land of Israel, when there will be no more war and no more bloodshed. We hint at that on Seder night by taking the matzah, breaking it in two, and putting the larger half away. In fact, there is a sentence in the book of Psalms, Ma rav tuvcha asher tzafanta l'reacha. How great is the goodness that you have concealed for those that respect you, that fear you. That is a reference to the future redemption, and it uses the same word, tzofanta, tzofon, which is the word we use for afikomen. And the afikomen here is called tzafon, and that means that which is concealed. In this particular reference in the book of Psalms, King David is looking into the future. How great is the goodness that is concealed. It's the greater goodness. It will overwhelm the miracles of the past, will be the redemption of the future. So we take the matzah and we hide away the larger part to indicate that we as a Jewish people believe that there is a redemption to come, redemption in the future. A slight variation in the theme, the Ramchal puts it in the following terms. And this is so important, because we go through Seder night after Seder night after Seder night. And we went through the Seder nights of centuries. We've all been through some dramatic Seder nights during COVID. And every year at Seder night, we hope for the redemption to come. And we think, are we ever getting there? Is it coming closer? So he brings a great analogy. When you're taking an axe and you're chopping a tree, not something that I have done very often, I must say. So what happens is that you chop, 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 and you make indentations in the tree until eventually you are successful and the tree topples. In the same way, we're living in diaspora in Golos, and every year at Seder night, we make an indentation in that diaspora existence, so that ultimately, eventually, the diaspora existence will come to an end and we will have the Messianic era. And we think that Seder night doesn't make an impact. Oh yes, it does. Each year, as a collective Jewish people, we are making those indentations, and please God, will bring us to the realization and the ultimate revelation of the Messianic era becoming Mashiach. And we know so well how much we need it. Let's move on in the Haggadah to an interesting paragraph on page 24. On page 24, we say, this is a bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt. And we hold it up and we say, this year we are slaves, next year we will be free. Now, we often struggle with this paragraph, this year we are slaves, because thankfully we are not slaves. There are many Jews over the millennia who've said this in situations of slavery. But generally we don't feel that, unless this year is a little different. Let me tell you a story by someone called the Chassam Sofer. In 1883, the Jews of his country were given emancipation. And this created great celebration amongst the Jewish people. And of course this was a great moment. It meant freedom for the Jewish people. It meant opportunities that they hadn't had before. But the Chassam Sofer, the Rav, was rather worried, because with that was a risk that we would feel too settled, complacent, acculturated in the culture around us. And that, he wasn't sure, was such a good idea. So he got up and he spoke, and he told the following analogy. There was once a king who had a son, and the son did not behave so well. So, when this was repeated behavior, the son, in fact, was banished from the palace. And the son went to live and had to make his own way. Difficult times. What training did he have? He was trained as a prince. Difficult times. But he went to live in the forest and began to create his own life in a very basic way as a peasant. One day, the king began to feel that this isn't a way for a prince to live. So he sent his builders to build the son at least a decent house in the palace, somewhere good to live, maybe with a patio and a garden of some sort. When the builders arrived, at first the son was really thrilled. Wow, that's great. At least my father hasn't forgotten me. I knew that anyway. But now I'll be able to live with a greater degree of comfort. Oh. And then he had second thoughts. 1 second, if my Father is making me comfortable here, then doesn't that mean it's going to take me longer to get back to the actual palace? Maybe this isn't such a good idea after all. When we start feeling too comfortable in diaspora, beyond the Messianic era, maybe that indicates that redemption is too far away. But when we start feeling a little less comfortable in diaspora, a little less complacent, maybe that's an indication that the return to home is coming closer. This is what we say in the Haggadah. Hashata Avda. Now we are servants. Now we don't really feel comfortable. But in that discomfort, there is comfort, because maybe next year we'll be in Yerushalayim. I think it's a powerful thought, particularly this year, where none of us are feeling as comfortable in our current circumstances as we did in previous years. Next paragraph. After the Manashana, we were slaves to Pharaoh and Mitzrayim. And here's the first opportunity to use this beautiful card and to catapult this family back into the times of Mitzrayim and ask the question. When it comes to slavery, it isn't just hard work, it's humiliation, loss of dignity, and many other painful experiences. As you read this paragraph and look at this picture, imagine you could be projected back, looking into what happened then, and discuss what was the most difficult aspect of the slavery. Was it the hard work? Was it the emotional component? Create a drama and bring it to life. By the way, and I think we've had in previous years, is for children to, prior to Seder night, to do some play acting, excuse me, of slavery, of the dialogue between Pharaoh and Moses, and in these particular points in the Seder night for them to come forward and to help bring the scene to life. We're going to move on to the paragraph that we all know well, which is the paragraph on page 30, V'hi she'amda. V'hi she'amda la'avosenu. In this paragraph, we have talked about the fact that God made a promise to Abraham. In every generation, that he would always look after us. But we note that in every generation, they have stood up against us and wanted to destroy us. But God will always be there for us. Why is it that we are often the subject of such difficult emotions on the part of our hosts and others? It's an important discussion to have because it began in Egypt. It was in Egypt the very first time that we were in an indigenous population, but the host population turned against us. What was it that turned them against us? Why does it happen time and time again? So that's a discussion that you could have, but there's a story that goes with it from Yaakov Glinsky. This is an anecdote. There was a man, Jewish man, came to shul and heard the rabbi give a really, really great speech about the importance of giving charity. Now, this man was a wagon driver, didn't really have any spare resources to give charity, but he thought, the rabbi did say that charity isn't just about money. Charity is about doing good things for other people, helping other people when they need it. So you know what I can do? I know what I can do. I can, instead of when I get home and park my carriage outside the house, and I normally switch the lights off, we live in a pretty dark street, I can leave my oil lights on to illuminate the streets at night, so that those who are trudging home late at night have some illumination. That will cost me a little bit in terms of oil, and that'll be charity too. And with great excitement at his thought process, that's what he did that night. He left the oil lamps on to illuminate the dark streets. To his horror, when he came back next morning, he found that the oil lamps had been completely smashed. The glass was shattered across the seats of the carriage. The oil had stained the carriage. He thought to himself, who on earth would have done something so violent, So unnecessary, such an act of vandalism. So he went, rather dejected, to shul that morning and told the rabbi what he had done. He'd been so inspired and thought he'd done a great idea. The rabbi thought, this is very strange. The rabbi said to the wagon driver, you know what? Who could it be that doesn't like light at night? Who could it be that prefers the streets to be dark rather than illuminated? And they thought for a few minutes, ooh, only burglars, only thieves. For them, light's no good because it shines up on their bad activities. It must have been burglars who smashed your lights. Now, the Jewish people are a light unto the world. We have taught the world so many things and we continue to do so. And that's part of our role, to be examples of how Hashem wants human beings to live in the world. And those who don't like us are those who don't like our light, because it shines a light on some of the ways in which perhaps they are living that are not up to standard and not the way that they should be. And that's sometimes perhaps why they don't like what we do. They resent how we behave. And that's why in every generation they have stood up against us. In every generation they attack us. But we remain the light unto the nations. In the next part of the Haggadah, we really look at 3 sentences from the Torah. And those sentences take us through the story from the beginning. How we got down to Egypt in the first place. How we settled there. How the Egyptians turned against us. How we cried out to Hashem. And how Hashem redeemed us. So how we got down to Egypt. How the Egyptians turned against us. How we cried out to Hashem and Hashem redeemed us. And there's plenty of opportunity to use breaking news. The king is dead. Long live the king. The nation mourns the loss of Pharaoh, but new Pharaoh ready to rule. That is a reference. That is a reference to, where is it here? Page 34 in the middle, which talks about how one Pharaoh died and the Jewish people cried, but another Pharaoh took over. You can discuss why did they cry. I mean, after all, wasn't this good news? He wasn't good to them. Perhaps it was good that he had died. So why did they cry? I won't even give you the answer. I'll let you discuss it around your own Seder night's table. But there's great opportunities here to discuss this. Let me share with you an idea which is a little bit deeper. Because the Haggadah tells us on page 34, in this particular Haggadah, the Egyptians subjugated the Jewish people, the children of Israel, with hard labor. With hard labor. They made them work hard. Now in Hebrew, the word for hard labor is perach. Perach. Actually, that word can mean different things. It can mean hard labor, back-breaking work. And in previous years, we've had a discussion because the Egyptians made the Israelites do work that they weren't naturally good at. Everybody had to do work that they really didn't like. Often around our Seder night table, we've asked everybody, what's the worst chore that you have to do? And dramatize. So if one child says, oh, I hate tidying up, we would dramatize the Egyptian taskmaster, we make you tidy up all those Lego bits on all the cars and all the crayons and all the colours and all the dolls. And once you tidied it up, they would then say, that's not good enough, and make you start all over again. So it means hard work, hard labour. But it has another meaning too. Perach. It's a composite word with a soft mouth, which is the opposite of hard labour. But in fact, there were 2 stages in the slavery. It began with perach, a soft mouth. an inducement for the Jewish people to get involved in building works. It was done in a very manipulative way, implying this would be good for them, good for the economy, good for their future, and they got involved. But then the Egyptians raised the bar and made it more and more difficult for the Jewish people, for the Israelites, to produce the quota that they'd undertaken to produce. And then gradually there were also taxes imposed on them. And then it moved from the softly spoken manipulative inducement to the hard labor. Both aspects. Now, if we think about it, how many times do we dip on Seder night? We dip initially in salt water. And we also dip in charoses later on. The Novominsker Rabbi explains that these two dippings represent these two types of perach. One dipping in something sweet, it appeared sweet at first, and the other dipping in something salt water, which actually was bitter. We reflect both types of manipulation that we suffered as a Jewish people. Now, the Haggadah tells us that the Jewish people were almost beyond redemption, but in fact, they did two mitzvot, which earned them redemption. The mitzvah of the bringing of the Pesach sacrifice, and the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Yeah, they hadn't done Brit Milah for many, many years in Egypt, but they did Brit Milah to enable them to have the carbon Pesach. And this was a brave thing to do after not having done so for so long. And Brit Milah, of course, is such a powerful mitzvah, an important mitzvah, that every boy has a Brit Milah. And I came across a story in Haggadah by someone called Rabbi Yaakov Bender. And it's a story about Brit Milah. Probably a story more appropriate for Key Stage 2 than Key Stage 1, but it's a personal story about his own parents, Rabbi Yaakov and Rebbetzin Lifsha Epstein. Not his parents, his grandparents. It's a story that his mother told every single year at Seder night. She was 4.5 years at the time, but she remembered it very, very vividly. They were living in Minsk, in Russia. And at that time, of course, there was no Jewish practices allowed in Russia. She's 4.5 years old. There's a knock on the door. And at the door stands a Russian soldier, a large man carrying a bundle. He comes into the house, and inside that bundle is a baby. And he hands the baby to the mum of the house, Rabbi Bender's grandmother, and says to her, I am Jewish. And I promised my grandmother that I would give my own son a Brit. But I'm a Russian soldier. I won't be able to do it. I'm going to leave my baby with you to arrange the Brit, and I'll be back for my baby. And he disappears. He goes. And the parents are left literally holding the baby. And they weren't sure what to do. To do a Brit Milah in those days was dangerous. On the other hand, clearly this man was really, really determined that his son should have a Brit Milah. So they decided they would do a Brit Milah and take care of the baby. They put blankets over the windows to muffle the sounds of a crying baby. They got the mohel to come quietly, secretly, and they performed a Brit Milah, and for 2 weeks, Rabbi Yaakov Bender's grandmother looked after this baby as though it was her own. And 2 weeks later, the soldier came back, as they knew he would, to pick up his baby son. And he was very grateful to them. He didn't want to give them his name, but he gave them a piece of paper with his number on. Every soldier has a number. And said to them, if you ever need me, I'll be there for you. You helped me, I'll help you. Now, Rabbi Epstein Rabbi Bender's grandfather, was a devoted man. And although the study of Torah was not allowed in those days in the country of Russia, he would go out late at night to study Torah with friends. They did this night after night after night, learning through the darkness for many hours. And then one day, unfortunately, they were discovered. There was a knock at the door, soldiers came, and they were all arrested. They didn't even have a chance to go home and tell their wives that they'd been arrested. They simply were taken away. Obviously, Mrs. Epstein was extremely worried about where was her husband, where were their whereabouts. This went on for a few days and she didn't know what to do. And then she remembered the number that the soldier had given her. So she goes to the local barracks where the soldiers are stationed, presents this number and asks if she could speak to this soldier. The soldier, in fact, is there, brings her into his office or room, hears the story and says, "Let me see what I can do." The days go by. And then, on an Erev Shabbat, suddenly a carriage pulls up outside of their front door, and out jumps a man who was clean shaven. And in fact, Rabbi Bender says that his grandmother, who was a little girl at the time, his mother was a little girl at the time, if you remember, 4.5 years old, didn't recognize this man, but it was his own father. He left with a beard, but he had been forced to shave his beard. And he told them what happened. In fact, because we were learning Torah, we were going to be shot. That was what was going to happen to us. And everything was arranged for us to be shot. And at the very last minute, a soldier came rushing along and called out. A soldier on horseback came rushing along and ordered them to stop and that they should all be spared and sent home. This was the soldier whom they had helped with his son's Brit Milah. They'd helped him with the mitzvah Brit Milah, and then he helped them in saving the lives of Rabbi Epstein. So it's an important moment to focus on the importance of Brit Milah. Let's now come on to the 10 plagues. So much to discuss about the 10 plagues. The 3 groupings of the 10 plagues. You may recall from previous years, there's always a discussion as to why the 10 plagues are split into 3 groups. Do you remember from previous years? Well, one reason is that the first set of plagues were below the ground. The second set of plagues were really what you might call at living level. And the third set of plagues were from above. Another reason for the grouping of the 10 plagues is plagues 1 and 2 had warnings. Plagues 3 did not. Plagues 4 and 5 had warnings. Plague 6 did not. 7 and 8 had warnings. Plagues 9 did not. And the final one had a warning because it was the last plague, grouped in terms of their warnings. But I came across a very fascinating idea, which is really part of a book by Rabbi David Herman. The Exodus you almost passed over. And he raises 2 fascinating questions about the plagues. Question number 1 is that why did God in fact bring 10 plagues? God could have whisked the Jewish people away on a magic carpet and take them all out of slavery without 10 plagues. Or God could have performed 1 or 2 plagues that would have been powerful and effective to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. Why 10 plagues? Now we are told the 10 plagues correspond to the 10 statements that God ushered when he created the world, and actually to the 10 commandments as well. But he gives another fascinating reason. You know that Pharaoh was not an atheist. He was not a non-believer. Oh, he believed all right, but he believed in pagan gods, a whole pantheon of gods, a whole range of different gods. The god of thunder, the god of water, I don't even know, the god of war, the god of animals, the god of nature, the god of the Nile, all sorts of gods. There's another fascinating thing about Pharaoh, is that he seemed to have a particular obsession with the details of the plague. If you remember, when it came to the last plague, the killing of the firstborn, Moses was told by Hashem that it would happen in the middle of the night. But Moshe Rabbeinu told Pharaoh it would happen at around midnight. Why? So we're told because if it had happened not precisely when Moshe had predicted, then Pharaoh would have said, yes, it's true that the firstborn died, but it wasn't it. Strange. Would it have made such a difference? The plague of frogs, which was absolutely unbearable for Pharaoh and his people. And Pharaoh summoned Moshe Rabbeinu and asked him to remove the plague of frogs. But in fact, Moshe says to him, when would you like them removed? I know what I would have said, frogs jumping all over the place. Now, as soon as possible. He didn't say that. He said tomorrow, to test whether Moshe Rabbeinu really was in control, or somehow or other was just able to predict these peculiar plagues. Strange. You want them to move now, not wait till tomorrow. Why this particularity about the details of the plagues, which we see in other plagues as well? So, in an extensive analysis, Rabbi Herman presents the following conclusion. As we've said, Pharaoh believed in a range of gods, not in one god. The purpose of the plagues was twofold, two which is one. Ultimately to demonstrate that there is only one God, one supreme power, one superpower. But simultaneously to dismantle the idea that there are many different gods, any other gods. Now, in an existence of a world of gods, the gods fight against each other. They're not unified. There's no united nation of gods. They fight against each other. They are, after all, the deification of the human being. The god of water will fight against the god of fire. In a war, there isn't precision, as well we know, as to exactly what happens, when it happens, how it happens, who makes it happen. But in a situation where there is one overarching power in total and utter control, of course there is precision. Of course there can be precision. The plagues were designed to systematically dismantle the belief in the gods, God by God. You believe in the god of the Nile? Okay, we'll strike the Nile. You believe that perhaps the god of nature is more powerful than the god of the Nile and therefore outlasted the Nile? Okay, we'll strike the crops. You believe in the god of wild animals? We'll strike the wild animals. But the point is that if this was a battle between the gods fighting out for dominion, then it wouldn't have been, Moses wouldn't have been able to precisely predict exactly when it would all happen. Because, as I said, this would be a battle between them with imprecision, depending on who is dominating at the time. So the plagues were designed to systematically dismantle belief in this multiplicity of gods. But Pharaoh was not convinced. Maybe this was just one god dominating over the other many gods. Therefore he tested Moshe Rabbeinu. Can you predict precisely when it's going to stop? And even in that final plague, of course the plague was going to happen precisely on time, but Pharaoh might not be able to see that it would happen precisely on time. And therefore, although he would have to acknowledge that there was the killing of the firstborn, he might still hold on to his ridiculous belief that in fact it was still one god over others dominating, had there been an opportunity for him to question the precision. It's a very powerful idea, and we illustrated this year with a rather creative option on our website. Here we have pictures of the gods. Cut them out, bend them, cut them out, separate them, bend them so they stand. You might need to weight them behind, and take a light ball, or before Yom Tov, crunch up newspaper and create a ball, and then knock down the gods one by one, perhaps giving a prize. That's the basic idea, just to let off some steam, but it can be made a much more sophisticated idea, because before you knock them down one by one, look at what they are and explain which of the plagues demolished which of these gods. So if you're aiming to knock down the god of war and fire, which plague demolished the god of war and fire? That's a good one. Well, in fact, the plague of hailstones was a combination of fire and water. Now, clearly, the gods of fire and water wouldn't unite, in that it wouldn't work together. They are opposites. A plague that united fire and water was clearly not driven by the god of fire or water, but a power that was beyond both of them. So this is a game and fun that can be into quite a sophisticated discussion as to how, in fact, the plagues systematically dismantled the beliefs of the Egyptians. We're going to close this year with a story, because on the center of the table we have the cup of Eliyahu Hanavi, the cup of Elijah the prophet. And because we know that the final redemption will come, and as we said, that is going to be the bigger redemption. The final redemption will come. But I want to share a story which is really about Elijah the prophet, because we've always maintained that every so often Elijah appears in different guises. And I came across a story written by Rabbi Ron Yitzchok Eisenman. The story appeared in Mishpacha magazine, I can't remember when, some time ago, and it tells a story when he was a little boy in August of 1974. And his parents, he lives in the States, he lives in Brooklyn, and his parents took him on a family vacation to a place called Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which apparently is very leafy and very nice. They stayed in a motel, and when they got there, the parents said to the brothers, "You can go and explore." And so they did. Now, this young man was only 15 years old at the time, and plenty to explore. And certainly to come from town and to get the fresh air was great. He found a shed full of tools. Gardening tools to maintain the area. And he was intrigued by a massive pair of shears that were hanging up in the shed. And he decided to try and reach to get them down. So he took the step ladder. He took the step ladder, just checking the details, climbed on it, a rickety step ladder, to reach this pair of shears. But the step ladder gave way, he fell down, and as he did so, he slammed the door of the shed closed. It was dark. He dusted himself down and thought, well, I'll just open the door. But the door closed, locked. It was completely locked. And suddenly all the bravado and all the excitement of going into the shed and playing with the tools disappeared, and he literally began to cry, realizing that his family would have no idea where he was, and he could be there for hours and hours and hours. Who knows when the next person would come and visit this shed? And he sat there and cried. And as he was trained to do, he davened, he implored Hashem to help him, and didn't know what to do. The hours passed by. He could see through the small window that was getting darker and darker outside. And then he thought to himself, you know what? I really need a miracle to get me out of here, to get a miracle. And then he heard a slight movement outside the shed. This must have been around about midnight. And the first thought that came to his head was, maybe it's Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi, who's come to rescue me. Well, the door opened, and a hand pulled a light, which sounds like he didn't even know was there. And in the doorway was a large man who was wearing overalls and a shirt, and was clearly the man who ran the shed. And he said to the young man, "Are you all right?" And the young man said, "No, I came in here and I was playing with the tools and I got stuck." And the man said to him, without telling him off, "Your parents have been looking for you. You better go and find them." He ran out as fast as he could, found his parents, who of course were worried and doing everything they could to look for him, flung his arms around them and burst into tears and apologized and promised he would never do that again. And he was going to daven with greater concentration to thank Hashem for saving him. And the man had followed behind just to see that he was okay. And the parents, of course, thanked him and offered him to come inside. And he said, "No, it's okay. I'm not normally up so late." And then the young boy said to him, "What made you come looking for me?" Then the man said, "Well, if you don't mind, maybe I'll sit down, have a drink, and tell you why." Sat down, poured him a drink of water. And this man, who was actually probably in his 70s, older than they'd first thought, began to tell the following story. He was from this place called Harrison. And 5 years earlier, there had been very, very serious race riots in Harrison. Now, he worked in the area and started his job very early in the morning. As it happens, on the day of the riots, he was outside of Harrison. He was in New York, and it was very, very difficult to get back into the area. Buses were stopped, transport wasn't running because of the riots that were taking place. And he tried to hitch home. He was desperate to get home because he needed to get home so that he could get up for his job the next morning and keep his job the next morning. But nobody was stopping for him. So suddenly a car stopped. And said this man, "It was one of your people that stopped for me, wearing, a yarmulke on his head." And he stopped me and asked me where I'm going. And I said, "I'm going to Harrison." And he said, "I'll take you there." They got there, and at first the police wouldn't let them through. But this man, who turned out was a rabbi, by the name of Rabbi David Silver, he managed to say something to the police and managed to bring the man home. The man said to him, "Why did you do that for me?" Rabbi David Silver said that his father, Rabbi Eliezer Silver, had been instrumental in saving children during the Holocaust. And he thought to himself that by helping him, he's following in the footsteps of his father. So he saw that this man was stranded by the roadside, and he helped him and followed in the footsteps of his father. And this man, whom he saved, said to himself, "Well, if I can ever help another Jewish child, particularly, or Jewish family, I'll do that too." He says, "Now, I saw you family arrive at this place, and I noticed you all sitting down and picnicking. And I noticed later on that the ginger-haired kid had disappeared. Now, I normally go to bed at 9 o'clock because I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. But I could see that you were getting a little bit worried about his whereabouts. So I thought I'd hang around a bit and see what happened. And the hours went by and you couldn't find him. Then it occurred to me, maybe he's gone to the shed. It's always a place of fascination. So I decided, although it was late, to go to the shed. And there he was. That's why. So one of your community helped me all those years ago. And now it's my chance to help you. Okay, I better be off now. He was about to go when Ron said to him, "But we don't know your name. What's your name?" And the man smiled. "You don't know my name? You said it before. When you saw your parents, you said Elijah's come to rescue me. That's my name. My name is Elijah. We believe that, please God, Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, will come and rescue us. Let's have a wonderful, meaningful Seder. Communicate to our children the uniqueness of being part of the Jewish people and express our faith and belief that there are better times of redemption to come.